It's not taboo. We can say the word period. We don't have to call it, oh, it's the time of the month, or it's this to make other people feel comfortable. It is a period. Call it a period. Yeah. And they had lots of people doing videos, and it was on social media, and it's carrying on those conversations that call it what it is, make everyone else feel comfortable with it. If you say it enough, people aren't uncomfortable with it. Like I'm sure what you said a couple of times to people, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, fanny physio, it's fine.
Hello and welcome to Series 2 of the Bristol Girls Can podcast. Today our conversation will focus on all things women's health. I'm joined by Dr. Malika from the Bournemouth University, Kira, founder from women's health product Eleria, and Rosie from Bristol Physiotherapy Clinic. And I'm Heather. Welcome. We're here to talk about women's health and its barrier to physical activity. Women's health in general, there's lots of topics we can talk about, obviously around pre and postnatal, menopause, menstrual cycle, pelvic floor health. But let's start with, why has women's health historically been under-researched or misunderstood in the world of sport and physical activity?
I think from a research perspective, my background's sports science, and actually if you look, there was a fantastic paper a few years ago called Invisible Sportswomen. And if you look at the stats from that, they looked at 6 journal articles over 6 years to see what was published. There was 6% of studies that only had females in them, and about 63% studies that had both in. So you think that's not too bad. There was males and females in those, but if you look at the participant numbers across all of those, it was over 5,000 studies. There's only 34% that were female in terms of participants. And if we're basing our guidelines on that research, actually we're not getting that in sports science in terms of what we need to do. And I think part of that is people taking part in research we're seeing as slightly difficult because we've got menstrual cycles. And I remember when I was an undergraduate, and it was, oh, if you do a test on females, I'll do it in this specific phase. And I wasn't confident enough back then, but I remember thinking, well, we don't live in that phase of the menstrual cycle. We live across all the different phases of the menstrual cycle. So it's just been seen as more difficult to do research on women, and it hasn't been done. So therefore the guidelines aren't based on females, they're based on males.
Yeah, I think from a pelvic health point of view, often when we're looking at like the research, actually lots of, because it's quite a taboo topic, it addresses bladder and bowel problems, which people don't want to talk about because we have, preconceived ideas about that. Actually, lots of the sort of science that we have about that is underreported because it takes somebody to, raise their hand and say, yeah, I have these problems. So yeah, that also skews the research, I imagine, as well. So yeah.
And what barriers do we think exist for women and girls when it comes to participation across like the lifespans? Obviously, we have teenage girls, we've got pregnancy, we've got menopause. Kind of, do we think the barriers are the same? Do we think they're different? Like, what do you think?
Well, from my point of view, I mean, I look at the barriers in terms of pelvic health and any sort of aches and pains or musculoskeletal problems. And the barriers are there, particularly with pelvic health from even before pregnancy in teenage girls. I think there was a study that looked at all of the athletic participants of the under 20s World Championships, Athletic World Championships. And I think it was 53% of females at that games were reporting pelvic floor based problems. So from my point of view, that is a barrier that is actually relatively easy to solve. I mean, obviously it isn't causing a barrier to stop people at that games, but who has it stopped before those games? And yeah, it's, a muscle, it's retrainable, it's something that can be absolutely influenced and changed for the positive. And I don't think it should be there. It should, it should be something that we are sorting out, and that doesn't, continues then through the lifespans of pregnancy and how that changes our whole muscular system postnatally through to the menopause, which is, we could keep talking about. So yeah.
I think body image is a huge thing that probably flows through from all ages, because as we're growing older, bodies are constantly changing in every different phase of life, and for some reason we're all quite self-conscious. And I think it's come from a perception that we're all looking at each other and we care what each other looks like, but in reality that's most of the time not really the case. And so I think teenage girls, when their bodies are changing, they kind of then shy away from doing sport because you really are quite exposed in that sense. They worry about it, and then you find you never go back to it, but I'm seeing recently that as you sort of get a little bit older into your 20s, people are kind of refinding their love for a sport that they might have done at a younger age. And I think that's really nice to see. And I hope that like will continue and not get shunned away again when bodies change again as you get even older. And it's a bit of a cycle, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think there's so many niche differences for barriers across different ages, but I think there are definitely like body image, and I think time is one across all. So just juggling, as women and as girls, we juggle so much, and that's different at different points of your life, whether that's schoolwork and academic. And I see it in my students at university, they're having to go out and work and do placement and do things. Then if you get pregnant, you've got kids to look after. When you get older, your parents are getting older and women take on that care responsibility. So having time for physical activity, I think, is something that's common across all of that, and allowing ourselves as women to have that time for ourselves. And that's where physical activity is difficult.
Yeah. And sorry, misinformation. Like there's lots of like, at the moment there's a big push on Pilates that I'm seeing online, and also then there's the strength stuff. And so people are coming to me and saying, should I be doing the Pilates or should I be doing the strength stuff? Which one? I've only got so much time in my week to prioritize. Which one should I be, really putting my time and energy into? And there's often not a right answer for everyone, but it's, what you enjoy, what you make time, want to do. And that's the most important thing, I think, is finding the enjoyment.
Definitely. I think that misinformation is probably one of the most confusing things, I think, for women when they're trying to get into physical activity, to understand like what they want to do, I think as women, it's always what should we be doing? And I think all the information on social media, and that's really confusing. But I think that also highlights that lack of research and that lack of understanding. So obviously we know all this knowledge and that's developing, but it feels like there's still that gap. And so like why is that gap, and why are women's bodies not being used in research, I guess, the same way as men?
I think part of that is who's doing the research. So if you look from a healthcare professional's point of view, it was only last year that actually there's more female GPs in the UK now than men, and it was only slightly, it was like 50.05% or something, but up until that point there'd always been more males in that field who haven't gone through that experience. The stats I mentioned earlier in terms of research for women, that same Emma Cowley and her group did some research a couple of years later, looking across the studies that only had female participants and who the authors were. It's over 50% were female first authors, who are the people that lead the studies. And what was really interesting is actually, we know that number is growing in terms of researchers, so that field will then grow if you've got first authors. And they looked at the quality of studies as well. And if you had a first author and a last author, and for those that don't know academia, the last author is often kind of the supervisor, maybe the professor, the person in the area. So the first person's done a lot of the work. The last person's kind of more supervised and is the leader of that group. If it was a female-female combination compared to everything else, they were higher quality studies. So we need more people, more females like everyone who's doing that research, because we know it's important to bring the female participants with us. So partly that is because we haven't had those people in those research positions and leaderships to make it a priority.
I see quite a lot of women in pregnancy and in the postnatal period, and around that sort of time there's a lot of ethics, isn't there, to prevent actually good quality studies being done. There's lots of research that seems to be coming out to sort of support strength training in pregnancy, which is a relatively new sort of thing, but it looks like the study sizes aren't actually that big, and that will, I imagine, be because the ethics are hard. And the trouble with that is that then when the study sizes are a bit smaller, then it's harder for us to put what they're recommending into then the sort of World Health Organization or UK medical officers sort of advice for the general population. So that's a difficulty as well.
I think sometimes there's an expectation that you won't get the participants, but they're there. I had a PhD student doing the menopause, and at the ethics they were like, you'll never get that many people. She smashed it. She got more than she needed for that, because there were women out there and they had to do VO2 max tests and they had to come in and do sub-max tests, different stages, but menopause was one of them. They wanted to come in because they wanted to help. So the participants are there that are being active, they want to do this, but the ethics panel was like, oh no, you're going to struggle with that. And she was very determined and she got that. And she proved them all wrong, and I'm so proud of her for doing that. But that's part of it as well, other people not thinking that it's a priority or that there's enough people to do it, because there definitely are.
So we've kind of started talking about that pregnancy and like postnatal period. Obviously, a lot of what we used to think about was that not being physically active during pregnancy, it's not good, like don't start being physically active. A lot of it is, wrap yourself up in cotton wool and like keep yourself safe. But like, why are so many women told to be careful rather than be active?
It's hard. I think it comes back to probably the research that's been done before, or the lack of research that's been done before. A lot of it could come from that woman's perception of their body, and particularly I see it a lot in clinic where there's been recurrent miscarriages or difficulty with conceiving or rounds of IVF, and you know, particularly the IVF consultants might say, don't do the exercise because it's a potential stressor on your body. So women reduce their exercise, become more fearful of, you know, what that exercise is doing to their body, and then become less and less active, which is a stage in their life when actually building strength and maintaining strength and being, you know, fit and active for their mental health, their physical health is so important. So I think it's both from a research point of view and what's the guidelines that are out there, but also potentially from what that, you know, body has gone through as well. But I mean, the research that seems to be coming out now is really convincing for actually exercise not being the sort of stressor that it seems to have, we seem to have thought it was on that woman's body, and actually doing sort of even aerobic capacity work and strength work seems to have a positive effect on the woman, potential birth outcomes, and also the baby and the fetal health as well. So yeah, I think finding out, and for anyone that's navigating that, actually finding out what's right for them, sometimes like challenging the people that are advising them. I know that that's not always helpful, but it can be sometimes a useful thing to just say, why are you telling me not to exercise? Like, what is the actual science behind this? Can just help them understand, you know, the advice that's been given to them.
Yeah, I think part of the healthcare professionals, and I say it was the utmost bit of healthcare professionals, is the education that they've had. We know outside of pregnancy and physical activity, if you have a GP, if you have a healthcare professional that is physically active themselves, they're more likely to ask about physical activity or to recommend it. And that's not from the training, that's not from the guidance. So midwives, maternity, there's very little on physical activity that they actually get taught. There was research out, there was an audit of not every NHS trust, but a group of NHS trusts. And it was over 90% of people said they'd never had any training on physical activity to be able to give advice for pregnant women. So we can't expect them to be able to know what the guidelines are, to be able to share that type of information if they're not confident in sharing it. Because that same study looks like, do you know the guidelines? 50% over was, yep, we know it's 150 minutes moderate exercise was what they should have said. Only something like 16% actually said 150 minutes, and about a third of them thought it was 90 minutes. So they're losing a 60 minutes of exercise if they're getting that recommendation. And I don't think that's the healthcare professional's fault. I think it's what training we need to provide. And I'm quite passionate about this. I'm a This Mum Moves ambassador, which is Active Pregnancy Foundation and the Institute of Health Visiting, on a training program where you can become an ambassador and then do awareness courses. So I know, like, where Sport Active Dorset have trained local people in the local area to become ambassadors, they can then share the information with the healthcare professionals. It essentially goes through the Chief Medical Officer guidelines, what you can and can't do, what are the contraindications, that research that we were talking about, what we can and can't do, to give them the knowledge and a whole lot of resources afterwards. We don't expect them to become experts, they're not going to be, but if they know enough to point people in the right direction, that's the training that we need to do to kind of help them help the women.
Definitely. And what do you think, like, the biggest myth that still exists around pregnancy and physical activity?
Well, I think I see a lot of women coming in and saying, oh, my mum's telling me to not do any exercise. Or, you know, granny says, don't do that exercise. And it's like, well, okay, let's just calm down their voices. And let's listen to, or it's the, you know, the CrossFit athletes that I see quite a lot of. And they're sort of saying, well, should I be keep lifting? And actually, whatever is normal for your body, if you can maintain it with good techniques of managing that pressure, that intra-abdominal pressure, which, you know, there's lots of ways to do. Actually, yeah, that's the most important thing. So I would say it's sometimes the closest network in terms of family members that are worried about you and, you know, want the best outcome for you and that baby, but it's not always the most helpful.
And I think that resistance training, that strength training is a thing. It's like, oh, you can't do that anymore. You can't do vigorous exercise. And actually you can if you were doing it before. There was a study, it was literally in the past month, from a Canadian group that did high load intensity exercise for people that were already doing resistance. And there was no difference in the miscarriage rates between the two. They actually, you'd be interested, had lower rates of pelvic health issues for those that carried it on in the first trimester than those that stopped or reduced their training load. So I think it's that you can't do those types of activities, or actually you can't do it. Moderate exercise is fine for most people that they can do, but if you were doing it before, then you can carry that on. And I think also if you weren't doing it, people are like, oh, you can't start doing physical activity. Not while you're pregnant. You can. There's no evidence of harm. Start it gradually. Don't start doing your CrossFit but start gradually. You can start during pregnancy. Actually, we've talked about the barriers at different points of life. Sometimes it's an opportunity for pregnancy, for the menopause, to think about your health more, to use that as an opportunity to start doing physical activities. So use it as that. Start gradually, get the advice you need if you've got uncomplicated pregnancies, but you can start and you can do what you were doing previously. You may need to adjust it, listen to your body, essentially.
Definitely.
And when you're like working with those women, they're coming in, they're saying, oh, my mum said not to, and they said not to. Like, how do you give them that confidence? Because they don't want to disrespect, I guess, the advice they've been given from their loved ones. But yeah, how do you build that confidence to make them feel like they can do physical activity?
I think it's just trying to empower them into sort of realising that why do they love doing that in the first place? What is it that they get from that? Also, sometimes I try to not disrespect the family member that might be saying that to them, but just saying, look, is there a preconceived idea coming from a different time of when the research said different things, where we didn't have, all of that lovely research that we're now starting to get, and the participation of women in that research. So just sort of say, and I see it a lot where, outside of pregnancy, when women say, oh, my mum's developed or got this certain women's health presentation, I don't want to develop the same thing. And I sometimes say, well, you and your mum are living through different times. We talk about different things now a lot more. We know a lot more about how our body functions. So trying to not take that into it. And also, if they do want to sort of reduce their exercise tolerance because of that, and that sort of seed of doubts gets sown into their thought process, then just say, well, just keep moving, basically. Even if it's not that high level stuff that you're doing, movement is the most important thing. So however that looks, just try and keep moving.
I think as part of This Mum Moves, it's always the guidance that's available. So not necessarily questioning them, but was that different research then? Because we've got the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer guidelines that's saying it's safe. That's the government saying that. So it's a bit more trusted. Things like the Active Pregnancy Foundation have Find Your Active, which are basically leaflets on different things. There's one on resistance training, Pilates, swimming. So if there's a specific thing they want to do, you can send them that, have a read through this with that person, whoever that person is, and there's kind of do's and don'ts. So they're not saying everything's completely fine. There are some things you need to be aware of. So sometimes actually having that guidance and getting them to look at that with whoever that person is educates both of them at the same time. And if they can see it from a trusted source, actually hopefully they can both change their perceptions and carry on being active.
Yeah.
And going a bit sort of wider outside of pregnancy and postnatal, how important generally is movement and being active in helping women and girls through all stages of life?
I think going back and says it's at any stage of life there is an opportunity. We know that at all of those stages in life you can decrease physical activity, but there's also an opportunity to increase it in all of those phases. So going from kind of high school, from primary school up to high school, that's when I started actually doing more activity, because I went to a sport that I never would have tried before because my friend wanted me to go to it. So she wanted to go to netball, I wanted to go hockey, and then we vice versa basically went and did the sport. So all of those opportunities are so important at every stage of life to have that, and it's an opportunity for us to be able to do that activity if we've got the right support around us. So I think it's important that when we talk about movement as well, we aren't necessarily just talking about sport or exercise or physical activity. It's finding whatever works for you. So that might not be going and play hockey. That might be the worst thing that someone might think of, but they might want to go out for a run, which I would never want to do. They might want to go out and just go for a walk and go hiking and do anything. So it's finding what works for you, and that might be different across your lifespan, but it's talking about it when you're talking to women about movement, just being active. It doesn't have to be exercise. It doesn't have to be sport. Any movement is good for your body. Those 150 minutes that we're recommending doesn't have to be 150 minutes altogether. It doesn't have to be structured. It can be anything that works for you, essentially.
Yeah.
I think sport's really good as an active community as well, rather than a means to stay fit. It's also a means to maybe meet new people and make new friends. I know that a lot of my friends, when they've sort of gone and left university and they've suddenly moved to a new city and they don't know anyone, their primary means of going and meeting new people is finding a new sports club where they can go, even if they've never tried that sport before or they aren't necessarily super into that sport. It's just a really good way to go and meet people. And then a byproduct of that might be that, oh, actually, I really love this random sport that I've never thought of before. And that's just like such a great way into it and a different outlook on it. It's not all about being fit, being the best on the race or anything like that. It's all of the other things that it can give you.
Yeah, I think from like my own personal, experience with sport, I know that that's where like confidence came from as a young child, and it was never forced on me. I never was made to do sport, but it was always like an option, and it never felt like a chore. Or, it was always felt fun. It was always with friends, and I think if you can cling on to that, like sport's always come and gone throughout my life in different ways and for different reasons, but it always comes back to actually it makes me feel good. It's good for community. It's good for friendships and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think sometimes like when you experience sport at school and stuff, it can always be quite negative. And it's then really difficult to like find that passion again. But I think the main thing is it's just about doing something fun and like trying. I feel like when you are younger, like as a teenager, it's really hard to have those opportunities to try everything. Because obviously you've got like costs, you've got travel barriers, things like that. But when you're an adult, like you really can just go and give everything a go and find something that you enjoy. So I think, yeah, it's definitely really important. So Kira, let's talk a little bit about Eleria. Could you kind of give us some more information on that and like where the need for, I guess, the products came from?
Yeah, so I wanted to do some research into why people don't use menstrual cups, because for context, I started using menstrual cup in my second year of university, so that's like maybe 8 years ago now. And I always describe it as like completely life-changing, and I was kind of like, why don't more people know about this? Why aren't more people using it? So we did research, and the main things that we found were actually all about the convenience and the general awareness. A lot of people kind of only understand that product from the baseline perspective of it's good for the environment, and all of the other factors that mean it's better for you in so many other ways are kind of ignored and not used, which means there's a huge portion of people that are completely missing out. And one of our biggest insights is that as much as we all care about the environment, we're never going to put our convenience, especially in an area like periods and health, above the environment, as sad reality as that is. So why, when we design women's products, period products, are we not considering them from making them as convenient as possible? They're only considered as, right, how can we stop the blood? Rather than how can we stop the blood and also make sure it's a nice, convenient day-to-day experience for all those billions of people that are going to have to use them. And so, yeah, we built on that. And specifically for the cup, the main barriers were cleaning it in public toilets, sterilising it in shared living spaces. And so we developed our case to basically solve those problems. And then we're using social media as an amazing tool to basically educate people on all of those other positive benefits. I think just educating people on the like other options that they have other than what they were just taught at school is very much needed.
Definitely. And I know like we've had a conversation like between colleagues around how like when I was growing up, it was like either pads or tampons. Yeah. And if you play sport, it was tampons. But like if that doesn't work for me. So what else do I use? And instead you're just in these like trying to play rugby on your period and you're like wearing a pad and it's just really awful. We just like didn't have those options growing up. What sort of feedback and response are you getting like so far on your product, and like how is it helping with people being more physically active?
Yeah, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I think every person we talk to, I'm still quite shocked at their response to it, and that all of the things that we tell them, like, well, I didn't know any of these things. And I just find that so crazy. But yeah, it's so positive. I think swimming is a huge thing for me. So I swim a lot, and even though that tampons are an option, it's still not really a great option for a swimmer. It's absorbing all your pool water and you're then rushing to the toilet afterwards, and it sucks. Whereas cups don't do that. They don't absorb, they collect. So you're not having that same problem, and it's just so much more convenient from that perspective. You can do that activity, and your first thought when you get out of the pool doesn't have to be, oh, my period. You could kind of relax a little bit. And a lot of people we've spoke to have resonated with that. We talked to a lot of uni students who do a lot of sport. I played water polo at uni, so that was a huge thing for me. And it's just been great to see, I think, yeah.
I think from a women's health point of view, to like put that like slant on it, there's a lot, you know, tampons and pads are actually like slightly like vaginal microbiome disruptors. So you're, you know, putting really harshly bleached, you know, cotton products there. And actually, so if we can think about like making these far more convenient, like you were saying, then actually your pelvic health and that vaginal health actually will massively benefit from that as well. So,
yeah, it's been really interesting to see with a lot of the news recently about some of the more mainstream products finding things like pesticides and horrible chemicals in them. We have alternative options. You can buy organic tampons and other more healthy, quote unquote, versions. However, that comes at a premium price point. And so you're then basically pricing out people who want better health but can't necessarily afford it, and they're being forced into this unhealthy version. And then again, we like to flip that in that the cup is going to be a money saver as well. And so therefore it's also more accessible from that point of view too. So you can have the healthier option and not have to be financially disrupted by it.
Cool. And kind of, how do you get any like negative feedback kind of around like how to use it, or kind of like, it's kind of, they're like new products really, aren't they? Like, I guess, well, they've been around for a bit, but I feel like they're more, like, I didn't really hear about a cup until like a couple of years ago, and it does, like, it looks intimidating. So like, how do you like assure women that like it's not as big as scary as it looks?
Yeah, it's crazy the amount of people that say it to us. Cups have been around since 1960.
Oh wow.
It's just only sort of becoming more mainstream, and I think that has come as a result of people wanting to be more eco-conscious. That's where they've come into understanding about cups. It's definitely true that I think when people see it on the internet, they're just like absolutely terrified. The reaction that we see, so we do a lot of like pop-ups and things around university, giving talks, actually physically showing someone the product is a huge thing. People see it and they go, oh, that's like much smaller than I thought it was when I looked at that photo online. People love to like squish them. They're like, oh, do you mind if I like hit and squish it? Because obviously when it's in the box on the shelf or you're buying it on Amazon, you can't get that tactile experience. And genuinely just that, it completely just relieves people's minds that if they can feel it, give it a squish and kind of understand how it's going to work. A little quick demo has been like completely transformative. It's crazy to see how like talking to someone for 2 minutes will completely change their perspective on a product. So if I could go to every little Boots and talk to everyone, I would.
But also, if you go to Boots and you look at that product, it's in a package. Yeah. Like, so you almost need them dangling.
Like the mascara, they have the mascara ones. You can see it. They need that for you. Yeah, literally.
What more should we be doing to support women and girls with that knowledge around products and women health in general, that like in particular will support them with being physically active?
I mean, I think I kind of feel that a lot of companies now see providing free period products in bathrooms as a little bit of a tick box exercise. It's where can we get the cheapest ones, shove them in the bathroom, and that's done. We're trying to take a little bit further and be like, well, what about all these other product offerings? You know, like you said, some people don't want to use internal products. So have you considered offering them period pants and reusable products like cups and stuff like that? Expanding what you're offering people and actually understanding why you're doing that, and then giving them the education. So like I could say, yeah, everyone should start putting period cups in their bathrooms and providing those to their sports teams. but you still need to give them the education on top of that. So when we do it personally, we're always offering some sort of hour-long education session to the teams. So we're not just giving the product and hoping that they get what to do with it. We're making sure that they get the education to then go away and use it properly and get the most out of it.
I think there's lots of great products like this and lots of services and places that are doing good things, but trying to get that message out so women know about it is the difficult thing. We're working locally with a leisure centre, BH Live in the Bournemouth area, and they're actually running swim free in pregnancy. So once you're pregnant, you could basically get access to their pool for free. So it's that accessibility that they're getting people into that space, but trying to promote that. So we're basically want to do an evaluation with them to find all the benefits to the women, but also to the leisure centre. So we can hopefully, through West Sport and other organisations, share that nationally. So other leisure centres are like, well, actually, yes, this would be beneficial. So the more we can get that out there. But even within Bournemouth, like not everyone knows about this free swimming. I talk to people and like, oh my God, I wish I'd known about that. So it's trying to get that message out there as part of the evaluation. Yes, I can get an academic paper out of it. But how can we get women to know about it? So healthcare providers like yourself being able to recommend those classes, that swimming kind of access to women. So people are doing it well. It's just that promotion of getting that to the right people so people can find out about it.
Yeah, we have that in Bristol where every pregnant woman is able to swim for free. But you're right, like some women will come to me in their third trimester with, you know, pelvic girdle pain and say, I can't walk, and I'll say, well, have you tried swimming? And they say, no, you know, I can't access it. And I'll say, yes, you can. You can go to any swimming pool in Bristol, apart from the private ones, and get free swimming. And yeah, midwives aren't necessarily always telling them, so it's important, that education aspect. I think I see it from a sort of talking about product point of view, which isn't necessarily products, but like more medication, but like HRT and things like that. I think the same thing comes down to education.
I think creatine's a big thing as well. It's about for menopausal women. It's one of the, I think, most studied supplements for women. And people just see it as this bulk up thing, but actually it can be incredibly beneficial for women going through menopause and keeping that bone health and muscle health and
brain health, it looks like as well.
It's just like not like kind of, as you said, like marketed enough to the right people that need to know about it.
And why do we think like these key topics around women's health are still so rarely talked about?
I think it's twofold. I think there's still a sort of taboo aspect to it, and I definitely see that with the sort of things that I talk about, which is bladder, bowels and sex and pain. You know, they're things that if you start developing them, you know, often you sort of think, oh, I'll just keep this to myself, and I don't want to necessarily tell my friend about it, or even my sisters or my mum. Because I think it might just be happening to me and it's just my body. And then there's the education aspect of it. You know, I've started doing a lot more education of pelvic health in schools. And I still don't quite know whether that's right, because I get lots of these 16-year-olds looking at me sort of like, what the hell are you talking about? What are you talking to me about your bladder and bowels and, you know, pain? And you get this glazed look. And I think the trouble with it that I see is that it doesn't become a priority for you to understand about, particularly from a pelvic health point of view, until it becomes a problem for you. And that's really sad that it has to become a problem for you. But actually, if a bit like, you know, we all know how important it is to brush our teeth twice a day for our gum health and our you know, dental health. Why aren't we being told about, you know, being proactive rather than reactive with all of our women's health and all of these things that we're talking about?
And I think it definitely is getting better, but I think sometimes those of us that are in that world like think it's getting more better than it is. So, like Rugby World Cup last year, my Instagram was full of everything. But I was talking to someone else and they were like, oh, is the Rugby World Cup going? I was like, yes, women, win the final, come on. Like, it was so much over my feed. Like, most of the posts were related to it, even the ones that were recommended to me, people I didn't follow. But sometimes we're in there like, oh, it's fantastic, but other people aren't getting that. So it's how do we get that message out to those groups to start engaging with that? And I think that's the next step, to translate the research, to translate all of that in the pockets that we have to a wider audience.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the topics make other people uncomfortable. So like, I have endometriosis, like it took me 8 years to get my diagnosis. Like, it was a really big thing. And like, when it started with like painful periods, that, you know, classic, like my dad could not handle the conversation. Now he's like, how's your tummy? How's it going? And but I like forced it on him. And it's the same with my friends. And like, I've, you know, when I was at uni, so I had so many friends that were like, oh yeah, like I just throw up like the first day of my period. And you're like, that's not normal. Yeah. And it's that having that conversation, but everyone just feels like really weird about it and like how the other person's going to react. And like, you know, like on that topic, kind of what impact does that silence have like on women, I guess, on their health, but also their ability to be active?
I think if people think for so many of the conditions that we spoke about, it's normal. So postnatally, oh, it's fine, I've got a bit of leaking. Like, it is common, that does not mean it's normal. And I think it's that if you're not going to talk about it, you don't know. So it takes that one person to be confident enough to say, oh, this is happening, or that's not okay. And someone needs to know that. And I think it has such an effect on, because you suffer in silence, essentially, and you'll know from a pelvic health point of view the consequences of that.
100%. And, you know, I see, and I've been in this area of health for, you know, 8+ years, and I see, like, I'll have one person from an NCT group, and she'll go back and she'll say to all of her women in her NCT group, oh my God, this woman can help you with your pelvic floor. Please go and see her. And then I'll be like, you know, I'll see the rest of the 10 people from that NCT group. And I think that one advocate, that one person that's singing from the rooftops and doesn't care about addressing a taboo subject and making other people potentially feel a bit uncomfortable. And if they do, so be it. That problem lies with them. And I think, yeah, it's about that education. It's also about the education from a man's point of view as well. You know, when we go through these stages, there's often, not always, but there's sometimes a man involved in terms of the partners and things like that, and menopause, the same thing. And actually, if we can make them a bit less more comfortable, should I say, about talking about it, then so much the better. One of my party tricks is when I go to weddings, and I've got, you know, a man either side, they'll say, what do you do? And I'll say, oh, I'm a physio. And they say, oh, great, I've got a knee problem. And I say, oh, no, I'm a fanny physio. And I get one of two reactions. Either they're silent and they sort of don't really know what to say, and they, you know, talk to the next person, or they'll be like, oh my God, that's amazing. What stuff do you do? So I think, like, that can also aid the conversation and aid, like, it becoming less of a problem area.
And I think it's just saying those words. I remember the Well HQ, which is an organisation of women's health and physical activity, did a campaign a few years ago, I think it was now, and it was just basically saying period. And it was like, it's not a taboo. We can say the word period. We don't have to call it, oh, it's the time of the month, or it's this to make other people feel comfortable. It is a period. Call it a period. Yeah. And they had lots of people doing videos, and it was on social media, and it's carrying on those conversations that call it what it is, make everyone else feel comfortable with it. If you say it enough, people aren't uncomfortable with it. Like, I'm sure what you said a couple of times to people, they're like, okay, yeah, fanny physio, it's fine.
But yeah, exactly. But even then, you're using a word that is, like, you know, softening.
Yes.
In what it is, which, again, we should sort of be a bit more open about, actually, proper enough.
I think it's definitely true, though, that if we treat it like it's a normal thing, whoever you're talking to is probably just going to mirror that. So we had to raise investment for Eleria, which basically was me sitting in a room with a lot of men shouting about periods. And I used to get comments, oh, it's amazing how you just talk about it like it's normal. And well, it is. And they mirror it, they talk about it normally. The reaction is just whatever you've put out. So if you put it out as I'm a bit shy about this, they're just going to give that back. So I think, yeah, exactly like you said, if we treat it like it's not taboo, everyone else will too.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I know, like, from a coaching perspective, like when I was coaching girls rugby, I like went in straight away and was like, oh, engage your pelvic floor, like, oh, periods, like all this stuff. Like, they all knew what was happening, like, with my health. And, like, you know, they're 12, so at first they're like, see, pelvic floor, what's that? And then, like, by the end of the season, like, they're using that language themselves. And I think it's really important to model that, because, like you say, like, if we're weird about it, then, like, everyone around us is going to be weird about it as well. You've kind of all touched upon this already, but what should gyms, leisure centres, schools and all healthcare providers be doing differently around communication and awareness of women's health?
I think it's about trying to be inclusive of everyone who uses the space, but also be aware of who's not using the space and why they're not using it. Is there certain barriers that are setting them off? Is the gym, the weights, they have to go in the little corner and then you feel, or they've got this lovely women's space. And I kind of love to hate this term, but pink it and shrink it, when they're just like, oh yeah, we'll do it for women and we'll just, like you said earlier, we'll make it smaller and then we'll make it pink. And don't do that. Make it actually work with women on what we need to do. So if at some fantastic schemes like this Women in Pregnancy, can we promote that more? Can we get other organisations involved in that? To be aware of, at the end of the day, it will help them as a company more. Yes, we want it from the women's health perspective and hopefully they buy into that as well. But as a company, they could make more money, they could do things because of that. But it's making them realise that, and some of that is shouting about it and providing some of the evidence on why it's beneficial for them as well.
Yeah, I think from a product perspective, we understand that like the gyms and the leisure centres, they are businesses. And so at the moment, as I said earlier, they're wanting to get the cheapest possible product that they can put in their bathroom so they can tick that box. And we're kind of saying, hey, you could actually offer a wider range and potentially actually save yourself some money in the long run, because if you provided all of your members for this, they're set for the next 5 years. So you're giving them more options, you're potentially giving them healthier options, and you're saving yourself money. So, and everyone wins in that situation. But I think there isn't that understanding there yet, but hopefully there will be soon.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, it comes down to education, really. I think, it's educating the people behind the desk at those leisure centres. It's educating the people that are front facing with those women, and I've heard of some like David Lloyd in Bristol is putting on pelvic floor webinars or seminars. I do quite a lot of teaching in like CrossFit gyms to just make sure the coaches know what they can be, how they can be supporting their clients. And I think the better educated we all are about it, the easier the conversation gets and the better the response to what we're trying to help women achieve.
Yeah, they've got their trainers that are, so pregnancy, postnatal, trained in those areas. Those women are going to come back and stay coming back. If you put them off at the first class or they're not comfortable with it, they won't come back again. You've lost the customer from that point. So for them from a health perspective, but also from a customer perspective as well, in terms of their revenue and people coming back, actually, if you can make that more comfortable for those people to come, as you said, they'll probably bring their friends if they have a great class. Yeah. It works.
Yeah. And signposting, we see it with the GPs that often women will go to the GP with pelvic floor issues, and the GP won't signpost them to the right person. And that woman, and we all feel it when we go to a GP, we sort of take what they say as a bit of verbatim, and we then think, oh, but the GP said it's not a problem and it should get better and it's really common, and therefore I just need to deal with it. And actually you then don't go back, you don't get signposted. So if the people in the gyms and leisure centres can be saying, look, you can self-refer into the NHS Women's Health Team or any of those sorts of things, then so much the better. So it doesn't all have to be, a private healthcare sort of model. It can actually be that they know better about the services that we have, or all of that sort of stuff.
And to finish, what small step or one piece of advice would you advise someone to take today in understanding women's health and activity in more detail?
I think just look for some information. It's hard to find those trusted resources. So I'll take it from a pregnancy postnatal point of view. Like the Active Pregnancy Foundation have so many resources on this. If you're not sure, for example, whether you want to start activity, they have a Get Active questionnaire for pregnancy. So it's basically a checklist. If you don't answer yes to anything, you can carry on with what you were doing or start. So it's knowing where to go. But if one person knows, they can tell someone else. So whenever I speak to one of my students, I teach them a sports therapy program. They're like, oh, I'm working with someone and they're kind of just told me they're pregnant and they want to carry on. And I was like, right, go over here, here and here. And that person now knows where to go for those resources. So if you can find out and pass that on to other people, that will snowball effect. But it's knowing where to go for that trusted information. So I'd say for pregnancy postnatal, Active Pregnancy Foundation is the first place to go. Look at all their Get Active guides, look at the questionnaire, figure out what you can and can't do, and try and have that conversation with a healthcare professional. Hopefully they've got enough knowledge to kind of support you in that.
I would say don't let your pelvic floor be a barrier to exercise at any stage of life. It's a muscle, it's retrainable. We can always find out why it's letting you down at certain points in your life or with movement. If we apply the same principles we do to knee problems, shoulder problems, to that muscle and work out where the problem lies, we often can get amazing results, and it can help compliance with whatever exercise you want to do. So get assessed, understand your pelvic floor, and don't let it be a barrier to exercise.
Probably a lot more simple, but just find something fun and that you get enjoyment out of, and just run with that to start with.
Yeah, no, I just think, I was saying at lunch, basically, there's just so much around social media around like birth control being crap. And like, it's literally saved my life. Like, I wouldn't be sat here at work right now, like, if I didn't have it. And I wanted to have a positive conversation on it because it was something like different.
It's refreshing to like have both sides of the coin, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, I think it's like a choice. I'm not forcing everyone. I think it's a choice. But I think that a lot of the stuff that, I don't know why it comes up on my timeline, but I get a lot of that, like, don't go on birth control, hormone suppressing so bad for you.
I get the like coming off the pill after X number of years and how my life has completely changed. And it does feel quite pushy in the coming away from it, and I can 100% see both sides of the story, but it feels almost shaming for people that do want to continue taking birth control for whatever reason that is. And yeah, it's worrying that there isn't enough research and stuff, but this, like, you have to pick and choose. You pick your battles. Like, yeah, it's so hard.
It's the shame for me. Like I said, like, I wouldn't be able to go to work. I wouldn't be able to be physically active. I wouldn't be able to climb mountains, attempt to run a half marathon if I didn't have birth control. And like, I hate seeing that shame because it's like, oh, you know, like, you're only managing your symptoms of endometriosis. Yeah, I have a long-term health condition.
And
like, and there's literally no cure for it. Like, yeah.
Well, you're managing your symptoms. How dare?
Yeah, but that's literally what it is, because it's like, yeah, I've had keyhole, but it's growing back. I can feel that it's growing back, hence another form of birth control to get rid of it. And like, I find it really frustrating because, like, why are we promoting this, like, we shouldn't be on birth control, it's so bad to suppress your symptoms? I just want to be able to get out of bed. Like, I want to be able to have a job.
I think with all of it, I think the trouble is with Instagram, TikTok, social media is that those sorts of stories get clicks because it's you know, everyone wants to look at that like, oh my God, they're saying one relatively radical thing. And I think whenever we're looking at medicine on social media, the most important thing that we do is put we are individual people. Your body is different to mine, as it's different to everyone that's sat around this table. And
critically think.
Yeah, exactly. You have to critically think. But it's just really hard when you're seeing that, you know, often pretty-faced white girl that's saying that story. Not always, but you know, that's what gets the clicks. And I think, you have to just like really think about, okay, well, my body is different to that person's, and I need to do something that's different again. Which is hard in the moment.
You'll always hear so much more on the extreme negative stories than you will on all of the sort of like general positive.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you're only going to ever sit in the extremes because, like you said, it's what gets the clicks.
Yeah. Whenever I you know, not very good on Instagram, but I've got a little following, and you know, whenever I put the ones that I think this is so important that people know this, like how to do your pelvic floor exercises, and it like plummets. It's like 2 likes. And then when I put like a sort of slightly eye-catching title, it's like, you need to know this to improve XYZ, or you know, have you seen this? It's like gets all of the likes and all of the clicks. So I think it's hard. I think navigating that space in terms of medical advice on social media is a really hard thing to do.
I guess that's where all that misinformation comes from about like, oh, like training around your cycle and you have to do this exercise at this time and all that stuff, and like, do your Kegels, don't do your Kegels, do this, do that. And like, I think it's just really frustrating from like a practitioner point of view, and like, you know, those of us that are in this space, like trying to navigate it. Like, I have found it so confusing on how to be physically active with a long-term health condition, and it's my job. And I think if I find it confusing, how confusing is it for someone whose job it isn't, for someone who's physically inactive? And then I get stressed because I'm like, how am I going to do it in work? So like, people don't feel that way. And I think it's, just all the misconceptions on social media, I think, like, are not good. And it worries me, like, what young girls are seeing and like what they think is okay.
Yeah, and I think that's somewhere where research has to step in a little bit to see what women want answered. So I think like co-design is so important. We think we should do this type of exercise, but what do you want to know as women? What for your condition do you want to know about? I'm doing some cold water swimming stuff, and it's like, actually, you are pregnant, or you used to cold water swim, now you're pregnant. What do you want to know so you can make an evidence-informed decision on whether you do exercise or not, and that evidence isn't out there at the moment. So some of our research is actually, okay, what do you want to know? Now we're going to answer that, rather than us going like, oh, we don't know this, let's go and do it. We've kind of had that conversation first on what do you want to know, how do we answer that questions, and then our really important job is to translate that so they find out, so they aren't getting their information from that social media, or we're that social media person that they're seeing. And I think that's the tricky bit of trying to translate our research so the women asking those questions get the answers that they need.
Yeah. I think there's a big trending sport piece that we're seeing. I think that's what you're saying, is that we kind of go through cycles where, oh, Pilates is now the sport to be doing. And I remember a couple of years ago it was strength training was the big thing to be doing, and then now it's running, everyone's running a marathon. And I think there's so many pros and cons to it, because if seeing those videos repeatedly is going to motivate you to get into doing it, and that's your way in, then that's great. But there's also a lot of cycles we're seeing that's quite getting unhealthy, people having injuries and continuing to do extreme exercise anyway, and people are seeing that and going, oh, well, there, I do it. And it's just, it's a mix of both being really healthy and also really unhealthy at the same time. And I think we've generally as a society kind of forgotten how to think for ourselves and assess how we personally are within ourselves and how we should act on that. We just copy whatever we see other people doing. So
it's that critical thinking you said of, should I believe this, should I not? And we try and teach our students as well. You're like, where are you getting your information from? Like ChatGPT AI is so much stuff, and you're like, do you trust that? Where's that getting that information from? Do you need that from trusted sources so they can make those decisions? But so many people don't get that, and they're just scrolling, and it's so easy to, as you said, it's the fancy ones that you get more attention on.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you all for your time today, and a really enjoyable and important conversation around women's health. She hadn't spoken for ages.
It did feel a little like hashtag ad.